Hello, I'm Mark O'Connor, the head of the international tech sector at DLA Piper, and welcome to the latest in our tech law video series. And perhaps the hottest issue is the issue we're going to be talking about today, the issue of AI, artificial intelligence, probably the most buzzy thing right now. You open any newspaper, switch on any channel, and the conversation is around the opportunity and the threat that AI brings. So I'm delighted to be joined by three friends, three colleagues, three huge brains and experts in this area to talk about AI and the opportunities and where it's going. As we've all seen with the recent Future of Life letter and so forth, this has really hit the business world. I don't know about you, it's hit my personal world. My son has some suspiciously good homework at the moment coming out. So let me first introduce my three guests. Victoria Albrecht, CEO and founder of Springbok AI. Thank you for joining us. And then to my left, Gareth Stokes, co-chair of our global AI team. And to my right, Bennett Borden from our DC team, who is our chief data scientist. So what a team to have to talk about this issue. So Gareth, can I kick off with you? Can we get into the weeds of this? Generative AI versus AI. Why the buzz right now?
Why the buzz right now? Because these tools have suddenly become much more accessible and much more available. Talk about exactly the transitional moment for that in a second, but let's distinguish how generative AI tools are different from some of the AI tools that came before. So the journey from ordinary sort of if this then that algorithms to AI was sort of characterized by initially the perceptron and then the neural network. So we had these systems that were suddenly capable of answering the question of how do you classify it when the only way to describe it is you know it when you see it. You can't describe it in perfect algorithmic terms. And these systems were very, very good at building classifier AIs that could answer those sorts of questions. We then suddenly had a step change going from those kinds of classifier AIs to AIs that were capable of meaningfully generating new content. Architecturally, the big step change came in 2017 with a transformer model that was developed originally by Google, but that suddenly opened this world of AIs that are capable of creating new content, new text, new images from a huge database of examples that they've previously seen, but they're not copying and pasting from that source. They really are, in exactly the same way as we would create new content by being inspired by it, they're doing the same thing. And they allow this new class of tasks to be performed. So it's no longer just about taking data sets and categorizing them. It's about taking data sets and doing something creative on top of them, about creating content that would previously have required well-trained, intelligent human beings to do the task. And that's why it's opened up a wide array of new tasks to being susceptible to having AI, take over some or part of the task, and why it suddenly created this buzz. The interface issue that I talked about earlier on, when we suddenly moved to those sort of chat interfaces back in November, that opened up this sort of world from going from something where you needed to be an expert Python programmer to be able to use the interfaces to simply be able to talk to it like a human being that you're texting and getting these remarkably good responses back again. And I think that the difference in technology and the difference in interface are the reason we're suddenly getting this massive buzz now.
Game changer, the interface, opening up to people at large. Victoria, Bennett, is that your experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just to add to your point, what's really exciting about generative AI now is that it's not only about replacing the sort of lowest level of worker at the most menial level of tasks, but it's actually capable of such high cognitive functions and performance that it's able to not necessarily replace, but really augment people all across the value chain of the organization. And so, of course, if you think about the CEO as the most high-paid person and the junior that's just come in as the most low-paid person, now that we're able to create savings across everyone, there's the potential here for the economy, for industries, for individuals is just so much higher.
And you use the word augment there, which is, Bennett, I know that's a word you use quite often. Should we get into that a little bit here?
I do, because it is this idea, right? How do we extend and augment the powers of our employees? It's going to take quite a lot of dissecting what we do, because a great deal of what knowledge workers do, and lawyers in particular, is we gather and analyze information. And a lot of even the training of younger level people is through that chugging through the muck to get to some specialty. So one, that is what is being taken over quite a lot, or at least heavily disrupted, is the gathering, summarizing, delivering of information. And so the disruption that's going to happen is not just inside a company, which is a significant disruption, but the market and consumers and suppliers. And so the one thing that's quite unusual about this technology is every other technological advancement has really hit the blue collar working class, right? So it's physically doing stuff, where this is the first one that's really started to challenge this white collar working class. Absolutely. And if there's some really interesting studies out there about who's going to be impacted the most. And so it's really important for leaders to get in front of that and understand how it's going to affect their business so that they can take advantage of these disruptions and not necessarily be destroyed by them.
And that's it, isn't it? Disruption sounds scary, but you've all used the word opportunity in the very close proximity to disruption. Victoria, coming to you, perhaps looking at Springbok AI and your journey and why you founded the organization. You've got companies who want to play in this space. How do you support those sort of companies?
Yeah, so our approach with companies is a two-part approach. So first, we figure out where are they currently in their AI journey. You know, what's their AI maturity, what infrastructure do they currently have, and also what teams do they currently have in place, what resources, what expertise. And the second step is to understand what's the organization's vision for where they want to go, what kind of organization do they want to be, and what outcomes do they want to create. So in working with companies for the past 5 years, everyone from Hogan Lovells and Dentons to German companies like Henkel or Wirth, and US companies like Oura Ring, the wearables company, we found that there are really three types of outcomes that companies want to create. Number one is they want to create efficiencies, and within that they also want to reduce friction of people collaborating with each other. So a really good example of that you may be familiar with is onboarding a new vendor. And even just the part of onboarding them from an InfoSec perspective, think about how many people are involved that have to email each other, right? And set up processes, fill out questionnaires. So it's not just about efficiencies, but also just about the friction removal. So that's number one. Number two is growth for scale. So if a company, for example, has a huge growth in usage, like a product company that's gotten funding, suddenly their usage goes up astronomically. Or as a good example there of one of our clients, they want to be able to deliver the customer service experience at the same rate as their product usage is growing. Right. So that's another place. And then the third place, and where it's really most exciting, is where a company wants to be innovative and wants to put their stake in the ground and create something new, be a market first, and just something that's not been done before. And where we're really seeing a Goldilocks zone is where they want to be doing something innovative and also combine it with creating those efficiencies, removing friction, or scaling for growth.
I like that Goldilocks zone. Maybe that's our new catchphrase going forward for getting it right as an AI deployment strategy as part of a digital transformation piece, right, Bennett? And you this probably echoes with what you're doing. I know your work together with Gareth and colleagues here is both internal and external facing. So perhaps tell us a little bit more about that sort of duopoly between the two ways you're looking at the AI opportunity.
It's really wonderful to be a counselor in this space at this time, right? There's so many opportunities and really exciting developments. It is disruptive, but then all changes are disruptive on some level. And so being able to give legal advice around the fair, ethical, compliant use of these systems and the technological backing. I have a team of a dozen or more data scientist lawyers and pure data scientists who can help companies get into the guts of these decision-making systems. Mm-hmm. Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Are they not doing what they're not supposed to do? But especially adding these systems together. So it's a very exciting time to be both a legal and a technical counselor. The other hat that I wear is bringing this tech to the firm. How do we practice law differently in the 21st century, especially using things like AI and generative AI? It is very disruptive to all knowledge workers, but if you look at all these studies, lawyers are right there at the top. And gathering, summarizing information is what a lot of these youngsters do. And so how can we bring that tech into the firm in a way that furthers and enables the firm?
An additive, augmentative.
Exactly. And not be swallowed by it. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting sociological question, economic question. And how do you boil down the essence of what it means to be a lawyer? If some of our time is spent gathering, analyzing, summarizing, and that is now well done by these generative AI and other AI systems, what is the essence of a lawyer? And that's a really interesting sociological question.
Which will develop over time, won't it, in terms of the future practice of law? But should we widen out a little bit? What other sectors do we think? I mean, Victoria, you're seeing this. Gareth, you're seeing this from the clients you're working with. Bennett, we've talked a little bit, and you were talking about the tip of the spear in terms of back in the US, the conversations you've been having have often been insurance first, financial services second. Is that?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, is that the case?
Companies that have algorithmic decision making as the heart of what they do. So if you think insurance, they're gathering information and it's a bunch of rules that spit out, I'm going to insure you at this price. Same thing with financial services, credit cards, mortgages, loans. It's the same kind of idea. Very closely related is labor and employment algorithms. So already many companies are using AI systems to comb through tens of thousands of resumes, even video interview analysis. And so the companies that are more data-driven and algorithmic decision-making driven are the first ones that are being regulated. And most of that concern is around fair, accurate, non-discriminatory. And so because those are regulated in specific sectors, you're seeing in the US this development of kind of sector-specific regulation around that.
Should we look at that a little bit more, Victoria? The examples you gave there were not all law firms either. So are you seeing that across the clients you're working with? Are you seeing it across sectors, or are there certain clusters that specifically feature?
Yeah, so AI and, as part of this conversation, generative AI is going to touch every single industry out there. But there are always industries that move quicker. And you touched on the insurance sector. We see the financial sector moving very quickly in this. Manufacturing, there's a lot of interesting use cases there. And the knowledge economies overall are just huge on this. So consultancies looking to find efficiencies across the way that they currently deliver their projects. You mentioned something a minute ago, Bennett, which was the question around what does it mean to be a lawyer? And something that I thought of was, e-discovery in the US. And it's now actually the law that you need to use AI tools as part of e-discovery, as part of the litigation process. Now, isn't it just a matter of time before that's also what the law is for the UK, and how we have to use generative AI tools as part of our processes here in the legal system? I mean, there are so many legal cases that are waiting in the backlog, especially in civil litigation, and there's just not enough lawyers to fulfill that. And one of our clients is a charity called Access Social Care. Their role is to help individuals get access to the care that they are legally entitled to. And the platform that we're building for them is around how to scale the expertise of the lawyers who are on a rapid decline in terms of availability. So if nothing else, this is a democratization of services.
AI for good, AI for social good. Yes. Professor Richard Susskind would be applauding hearing what you've said there in terms of access to justice. But Gareth, from your perspective, the clients you're seeing day to day and the issues they're bringing you in the AI space, what sort of, do they coalesce into certain sectors?
We talked about insurance and financial services. Those are certainly sort of sectors where we're seeing an awful lot of activity. Industrials is an interesting one because there's a lot of focus around sort of Industry 4.0 technologies and sort of, building a digital twin of the entire manufacturing chain, and then using, machine learning and other forms of data-driven technology within that. Life sciences, particularly from a research perspective, is an enormous area of interest. I think there's a longer tail to the outcomes there, inevitably, because of the regulatory journey that companies have to go on in order to validate those products before they come to market. But there's a tremendous amount of technical expertise within that sector. And also, I think we're going to start to see a lot of impact actually in some of the faster moving sectors like consumer goods as well, where the idea of having sort of AI powered choice to augment interfaces and those sorts of things is becoming very, very live. So there is no, great point, there's no sector that's not going to be touched by this. The middleware back office, back office implications are going to be universal. So anything that can help to improve finance systems, HR systems, knowledge systems, all of those sorts of things that are common across all businesses, those sorts of things are being impacted enormously. But there will inevitably be sort of sector-specific pieces that people have got to look at with multiple different regulatory overlays that sit on top of that.
Yeah, and in the knowledge and service industries, what we're seeing companies talk about is not just how they can save costs, but actually how can we deliver a better service, a better quality service, and faster for our clients, right? That's
Which will
where
be
the conversation is shifting to.
consumer-led.
Yeah.
Yes.
The expectation of
Absolutely.
that better, simpler service.
And one of the conversations that's quite interesting is how often this manifests as something about let's take what we've got and use it to be massively more productive. So very often that kind of unlocking efficiencies is not about unlock the efficiencies and then downscale. It's about unlock the efficiencies and have explosive growth as a result of it. So it's actually a very optimistic message from that point of view, because as soon as you hear efficiencies, it can be easy to kind of convert that into sort of a cost down culture if you're not careful. Whereas actually unlocking efficiencies in this case, at the moment, seems to be around high growth, high productivity, 10x multiplier opportunities with the cost base that you already have.
And it's really interesting to see how companies are taking advantage of this. We are at the very beginning of the effect of what this is going to be. And just like every other time of great technological change, there are companies who adopt it faster and take advantage of it sooner. Think electricity, think going from water to steam to electricity. There are companies that took advantage of that and retooled and did the work to take advantage of it, and they just completely inflection point away from everybody else. The hard part of this is understanding what risks also come along with that. And so this is the lovely idea of you have to have a diversity of thought in the creation of these products. Even red teaming, like what's bad that can come out of this? How can I predict that? How do I control that? Especially because the law is going to take years to settle. Legislatures, regulators do not move quickly, and it's usually not very good when they do. And so there's this period of time where companies are going to be working in this legal green space, and how we advise them on how do you understand the risk, how do you put controls in place for that in a way that predicts almost what the law is going to settle on. So it's really important not to be too afraid of this, but also don't be too excited, right? And have both of those voices when you're developing these strategies for companies. Right.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? Because the opportunities are legion, but there will be bad actors. And without bringing the conversation down, I studied AI at university in the 90s, and it was theoretical. But now the combination of sheer brute compute power, awesome algorithms, and shed loads of data means we've got this opportunity. The stars are aligning, and that data piece, the data might just be sensor data, but it probably is data around people's choices, people's buying choices, whatever it may be. So that starts to get us into the realms of thinking, oh, is that okay? And to your point, therefore, in terms of regulation. So what do we do here? We need to anticipate the law, as you were saying, Bennett. We need to get out ahead of this, so it's not another remediation project like GDPR version 2.0. Gareth is the feeling your pain right now. But let's talk a little bit about regulation and without diving too deeply. But what's going on right now? Because as you said, Bennett, regulation will take time to catch up. But where are we right now, Gareth? Do you want to start with that in terms of the UK perspective and widening out to Europe?
Yeah, sure. So I will answer the question the other way around by going with Europe first, because friends in the European Union were sort of early to the party in terms of actually recognising that this was an area that ought to be the subject of regulation. They were talking about the idea of kind of horizontal, cross-sectoral, AI-specific regulation earlier than anybody else. Yeah. Got a draft out there earlier than anybody else, and we've been able to sort of look at that text and follow the almost glacially slow process of seeing that then being sort of reviewed, updated, etc. And it's still in process at the moment. During the course of that, generative AI has become a big hot topic, and we've started to see that reflected back into drafts of the EU AI Act, with general purpose AI suddenly making an appearance as of settled drafts from late last year. But that is something that it takes the idea of AI as a thing to be regulated regardless of which sector it's in exactly the same way. The UK has gone its own post-Brexit different path on this, has defined AI differently according to the sort of the mischief it poses. So sort of almost two different dimensions to that. How autonomous is the system? Idea being a less autonomous system that's got greater supervision is therefore capable of creating less harm than one that's fully autonomous. One that is sort of entirely predictable is less capable of harm than one that acts in a relatively capricious and unpredictable way. So the more unpredictable and the more autonomous, the more it needs to be regulated. But then it's sectoral. There's a sort of vertical sector-by-sector approach with the idea that financial services regulators, FCA, PRA, will regulate financial services and insurance companies, MHRA might regulate healthcare use cases, and so on and so forth. And that division, I think, is one that's sort of broadly speaking being replicated in lots of different parts of the world. Some jurisdictions, China
very similar,
has definitely gone down the idea of having some single cross-sectoral, if it's generated by AI, it needs to be identified as such regulations, but also a vertical approach. And Bennett, I suspect you're going to cover the US in more detail, but it looks as though a sector approach is the preferred approach there as well.
Which is very interesting and not at all surprising. Coming up with a new regulator, like there's some discussion in the US and the press about, we need a new regulator. Well, maybe, but that'll take 5 years. And so the agencies that regulate specific sectors are basically, as even of yesterday, came out with a joint statement saying, we still regulate the same thing, whether it's fairness or discrimination at work or whatever it is. And just because you're making decisions by AI, the same framework applies. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're going to see is this kind of analogous growth of regulation. And that's important for companies when they are starting to build and use these things, because the regulators have a specific line of sight. They regulate specific things, and there's a body of law about how they think about those things. So even though we're automating some of this, most of what we're doing is still similar enough that you can kind of tell what they care about, which means building your controls to get the metrics out to prove that you're complying. A lot of times we find that companies who are, and I bet Victoria, you've seen some of this, where companies, before you've gotten involved, have started to build a system, but they don't build in the measurements and metrics that spit out the answer you need for not only the business purpose, but to satisfy the regulators. And so it's important to think in that way, realizing that the regulation really is probably going to build accretively.
So Bennett, thank you. Talking about regulation, their nascent regulation, regulation could be seen as negative therefore. So Victoria, bringing you in here on this point, to what extent, what is the relationship between regulation and innovation?
Sure. So while it may seem on the onset that regulation inhibits innovation, when we look at history, it's actually very clear that regulation doesn't inhibit innovation, but actually fosters it. It sparks it. If you speak to creatives, they will tell you that constraint creates innovation, creates creativity, and so I think that knowledge, in combination with the fact that the companies, again looking at history and the last downturn economy, the companies that invested into innovation at the peak of the downturn economy, which I think is where we're in right now as well, are the ones that then saw the multiple benefits of that on the other end of it, and that's that's the exciting, those are the exciting use cases that we're working with companies on too, who understand that this is the opportunity to act and to differentiate themselves and to really come out of that economy much, much stronger than they did the downturn, much, much stronger than they came into it.
Okay, let's keep that positive vibe going, therefore. This conversations around the future of AI. Let's look to the future a little bit. Who will be those organizations? What will they have invested in? What are the new flavors of AI or solution that we haven't necessarily seen just yet, but are just around the corner? I'll come to you each. There's a little bit of crystal ball gazing. Gareth, what do you think?
If I knew the answer to that question, I'd be out there doing it, probably a billionaire. One of the things that I think is really important, though, and it goes to the innovation question, is you can look at regulation as an external thing and you can look at policies as an internal thing, not just as constraints, but actually a standard setting. And it creates a level playing field, it creates certainty, and it gives permission to people to have that innovative attitude. And so the organisations that are doing that sort of embrace the fact that, you know, we're at the bottom of a downturn, we need to do something, and we need to standard set. We need to create that level playing field. We need to create that certainty and give permission to our people to go and do that. They're the ones who are suddenly going out and are sort of being the early successes in this space. And there are organisations that have made a great virtue out of saying they have policies in place, and they are also the ones who, it's no coincidence, have lots more active AI projects delivering value for the organisation already. So I don't think it's picking early winners particularly, it's picking the organisations with the right attitude who then become the early winners.
Such a good point.
So I'm going to avoid the question entirely.
Fair enough. No, very good politician's answer. Victoria, what would you say to that?
So the way that we look at this topic at Springbok is actually inspired by a recent paper on that OpenAI released just a few weeks ago, and looking at where generative AI, or in particular now ChatGPT, is going to be creating value. And their assessment of it is that while the model itself will create a good amount of value for the economy, the technical solutions, as in the software that's developed around the LLM, is going to create about 3 times more economic value than just the LLM by itself. So companies that are investing into building with the API, that's part of what we help companies do, is really where the growth in the economy will happen and where the great use cases will be developed.
Fantastic. Bennett,
I agree with that, Victoria. Marks? This is where the really exciting stuff is if you think about what GPT technology does and similar technologies to it, it puts learning and understanding on top of static information. And so one of the things that we're playing with quite a lot is how do I put GPT technology on top of static systems? So all of us deal with HR systems, financial systems, e-discovery systems. They can pull out information and present it, but that's where they stop. The learning is not there on top of it. Mm-hmm. When you start to add learning on top of that, it advances an entirely new level, almost a new generation or species of artificial intelligence. We have to remember that looking at generative AI right now is like watching a little toddler toddle across the room, right? We are all thrilled when the baby can now walk. We're like, yay, that's so great, but they're a really shit walker, right? So this is where we're heading toward, is just wait and see what this can do. But the learning on top of pre-existing static information is where it's going to transform the world.
What a fantastic way to end. Thank you, Bennett. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Gareth. So much to talk about here. So do join us for further episodes in our Tech Law video series. But if you'd like to see us in person, it's great to talk about artificial things, but actually have the human touch, the human in the loop, literally having today. Look out on our website, dlapiper.com, for our AI and tech sector pages, specifically for our future European Tech Summit coming up this November. Thanks very much.